Hi guys. Well, the machine is telling me I'm recording. I'm trying to. I'm recording with a different program, so forgive me if something's weird. Something goes strangely with this one. This is. I wanted to follow up my recording, my video from yesterday, with a few more points. So we'll call this history part two. Um, I had I had indicated, or I had mentioned at the end of the previous video that uh, I had had a discussion with somebody regarding the question of women's liberation, and I called it. I've been dismissive of it. Let me first explain the question itself, or the point of controversy itself, and then uh, use this as an example of what of the main my main point from yesterday, which was that history is a form of wisdom, or that actually history can make us wise, and indeed knowledge of history is essential for wisdom. Okay, so whether you take that in the colloquial sense of talking to your elders, your fathers, your grandfathers, your grandmothers, about the lessons they've learned in life, drawing from their experience, or you study history scholastically. You know, you read history books, you take history courses, and so on. I don't see that the two need to be opposed, that the two stand in conflict in any way. So, first of all, the question, women's liberation. Um, I called it something like a myth or something like that. Um, Now, what's the point, and what's the greater significance? All right, we've been told to be so very grateful to, for instance, early feminists, okay, what they call first wave feminists now, those women who were active in pushing for women's right to vote. Now, that's great. That's fine. I don't really care one way or the other. Um, One of my favorite personalities, Gavin McInnes, always says, "Sure, women should have the vote, but should they? But should they vote?" Um, Now, he's being silly, but let me put it this way. Um, Women say before they voted, let's say at least 50 years before that. So let's go back to 1850. And women now, my essential point is, who's better off? I'll let you think about that for a bit, and you can continue to think about that long after this video is over. Who's better off? Um, Now, I guess first of all, there'll be a lot of dispute over what is being better off. And, isn't that the central question of philosophy and philosophical ethics? What does the goodness of the human being consist? Uh, what does his moral perfection look like? What does his happiness, his health, his well-being look like? His thriving? That's the essential question of philosophy. Well, I asked the question. Well, it's a valid question to ask. Whatever way you come down on it is secondary, but it's a valid question to ask. And it goes like this: are women actually better off now than they were in 1850? Now, of course, technology is better, medical science is better, and all that. But are people happier? Are women happier? Are women more respected or less respected? Are they happier? Are men happier? Are children happier? Are the elderly happier? These are all valid questions to ask, and sociologists ask them. It's not racist or sexist or anything like that to actually ask these questions. So, before women had the vote, were they, as we're often made to believe, the property of men? And even if they were the property of men according to certain definitions, does that mean what we think it means? Now, I would say clearly that it would be a little strange if it were in fact the case that 50% of humanity was able to enslave the other 50%. And what about the fact that that 50% is often the most endeared, includes the people most endeared to the other 50%. So put it this way, the woman I love the most is my wife, and the person I love most is my wife, and of the people that I love the most, 5 of them are girls. So my 5 daughters and my 1 wife and my 2 sons. So in this case, of the people I love the most in the world, the majority are women. Now that doesn't make me special, and in fact that makes me rather ordinary. So, is this a new thing? And do I just happen to love my wife and daughters now because they can vote, because they can have jobs, because they can work in offices and factories and fight in the military? Or do those social changes have nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that I love that there are more girls than boys in my category of most loved people? Of course, it has nothing to do with it. My grandfather had 2 daughters and a wife. All the people he loved the most in the world were women. Now, I'm sure that the same could be said about my great-grandfathers all the way down to Adam. Okay, let's be serious here now. Love wasn't an invention of the 20th century. Respect for women wasn't an invention of, or an offshoot of the women's suffrage movement. Okay, that's silly. Then it becomes a question, I'd say, about how were women loved. One might say that I can love my daughters now by driving them to their places of work, driving them to their schools, helping them with their schoolwork. What if I go back a few hundred years and my daughters didn't have schools and didn't have places of work? Was it possible for me to love them? Would it have been possible for a man to love women, to love girls in the 18th, 17th, 16th centuries? Of course, of course. But this is the kind of silliness that this narrow political agenda forces us into, that we can't understand how humanity could have had anything good about it before these political benefits. Okay, we can't imagine how women were loved, respected, prized, cherished before we were enlightened enough to give them the vote. I'm going to say this. Giving them the vote is a whole lot easier than giving them what fathers and brothers and husbands were obliged to give women before they gave them the vote. It's easy enough to see that the people most liberated by things like contraception, no-fault divorce, abortion, are men. Men are freed from responsibility. Now, if you studied history at all, you would notice that in all the great legal codes of history, there was provision made for the rights of women with respect to rape and all that stuff. So, and conception. So if back couple hundred years ago, I seduced a young lady to whom I was not married, got her pregnant, and then buggered off, that the crown, my neighbors, my kin, my family, my township would take responsibility for me and make me make things right. We don't do that anymore. We don't take responsibility for each other because we have the RCMP or the Ontario Provincial Police. We have judges and lawyers, and politicians to take responsibility for us. We don't take responsibility for ourselves anymore. We don't take responsibility for our relationships anymore. These are legal. They're not moral relationships anymore. So I can freely cavort with women without regards to their moral well-being. I can get women pregnant, and I might, in fact, establish a legal or financial bond to that woman with respect to that child, but it's certainly not a moral bond. Okay, so don't suppose that the two are equal, or that one's in fact, or that the legal responsibility is more important than the moral responsibility. So in the modern age, we've changed moral responsibility for legal responsibility. We've differentiated the two. And this is what we do when we talk about things like divorce and so on. It turns moral entities like marriage and family into legal or financial entities. And who's the primary beneficiary of that? Well, it's not women, it's not men, it's nobody. Okay, so there's no progress here. You know, when we talk about women getting the vote and so on, we only focus on one side of things. And we don't realize that when we give them so-called political power, we take away the former responsibility, moral responsibility, that we had before. It's a trade-off. I'm not saying that women shouldn't have the vote or anything like that. I am saying that, in a way, it's a trade-off. Okay, so again, if you're going to study history, you're going to discover that life is a lot more complicated than the simple dichotomies that Marxists and feminists are going to paint for you. You have to ask yourself not how the law changed, but how lifestyles changed. Go back, put yourself in the position of a woman, like thinking of Little House on the Prairies. I'm thinking of the life of Saint Bernadette in mid 19th century France. Thinking about all the women that preceded them. Were they treated as property, like a wheelbarrow? Is that real? Is that in fact true? Now we know, for instance, that both feminists and Marxists hate the family. Now, I would say that that's more of a psychological, or that is to say, an irrational position than it is the result of their hard research. Okay, so to suppose that women were suddenly benefited, that they were slaves before and now they're free, belies complete, for simple people, complete historical ignorance, but for those pulling the strings, it belies manipulation. It's a political tool to get people to do what you want of them. Okay. Anyway, so that's all I'm saying at this point, and I'll probably make another video about this, perhaps, maybe nail it down again, talk about some other aspect of history and how history can benefit us. Anyway, peace, y'all.